Rachel Reeves has, again, said it without really saying it. Brace yourselves for tax rises.
I will make the choices necessary to deliver strong foundations for our economy.
I don't think either of us have ever experienced an event quite like Rachel Reeves's this morning, so close to a budget.
It is increasingly clear that Labour's manifesto commitment last year not to raise personal taxes is on the brink of collapse. Lucy Powell is the party's new deputy leader. Does she think Labour could recover from breaking their promise? You will remember Nick Clegg breaking his manifesto pledge on putting up tuition fees. I thought, you've agreed to that? You're going to get slaughtered.
I think trust in politics is at a very low ebb. I think we do have to tread very carefully.
And how can Labour turn the tide on Reform UK?
We have ceded the agenda too much to Nigel Farage, and I think we do need to sort of set the agenda more strongly.
Were you to adopt a much more pro-EU stance, that would galvanise the whole of the left, wouldn't it?
Hello and welcome to Talking Politics. I'm Tom Bradley.
I'm Robert Peston, and we're absolutely delighted to be joined by the new deputy leader of the Labour Party, Lucy Powell. Lucy, welcome and many congratulations. We do want to talk to you about how you see your job, what your agenda is. But I think we've got to start with what was a pretty unusual event today. I mean, Tom and I have both been covering politics for rather more decades than we like to admit in public. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think either of us have ever experienced or witnessed an event quite like Rachel Reeves's this morning, so close to a budget. She summoned a whole bunch of journalists to Downing Street, to that specially built briefing room, where she delivered a 20-minute speech, which was, she told us, setting out the sort of what she regarded as the sort of borrowing and economic background to her announcements at the end of November. And although it's not unique, I think Gordon Brown did used to, as Chancellor, give speeches, sort of in a sense setting out his view of the economy before the budget. Nothing as high profile as this, and nothing as focused on, essentially a message that was taxes are going to go up. These are the reasons, and it's not basically saying it's not my fault. And so, I mean, I just, as somebody who, you are now the voice of Labour members, what was your feeling about it?
Well, as you know, Robert, I'm not giving a running commentary on these things. I don't think that's necessarily helpful. But I think what Rachel was trying to do today was to sort of set the scene. We are in difficult economic times. We are in these very volatile economic times, and lots of things have actually changed since the last time Rachel delivered a budget, not least the big global sort of trade wars and tariffs and all the impacts that's had. So, yeah, I think the lesson that she and others have sort of drawn on recent events and things in the past is it's better to kind of lay the ground than it is to come forward with things as a surprise. But that used to be budgets of old, didn't they? I mean, not that old, but budgets of old in more benign eras was all about the kind of rabbits and the kind of surprises on the day. And I think more recent budgets have been more kind of difficult balancing acts, but also do benefit from a bit more ground laying.
I tell you, my question is sort of about the communications aspect of it. I think we probably all agree it's inconceivable you'd give a speech like that this morning and say the things she said in the press conference afterwards if you weren't going to break manifesto promises and raise taxes. But then why didn't she just say that? Why shouldn't she just say, listen, I'm almost certainly going to have to raise taxes. I know I promised I wouldn't, but things are bad. I mean, would you agree that's effectively what she was saying? In which case, why not just say it? Because people probably would think, okay, all right, well, let's wait and see. But
well, I'll fess up to you. I don't know what's coming in the budget, so I can't answer that question because it's not for me to sort of write it. But I think, as I say, I think it was more about kind of laying the ground. Now, whether that's a successful sort of political comms or not, time will time will tell. But I think it is important to provide a bit more of a commentary throughout the year, especially in these turbulent times that we're in, than maybe it was in the past, just waiting for those once a year sort of fiscal events, and it's all sort of crammed into that day. But for me, what I'm looking for from this budget is a really strong story of fairness, and I think Rachel did talk about that today. Keir was talking about that in his conference speech and to the PLP last night. That is the thing that I think most kind of Labour supporters are really looking for, a really strong story of fairness and giving a sense of whose side we're on. So where those decisions will fall, I want to see them, and I think we will see them through that lens.
I mean, if you look at what she did say, so she said we've got a debt problem. We've got to get the debt down. She said we've got an inflation problem. We've got to get inflation down. We've got to get interest rates down. Those were very clear priorities. And she also said, by the way, I want NHS spending to go up. Now, when you put all that together, that is, frankly, a message which says taxes are going up. And when you combine it with the other big thing that she confirmed, which is the Office for Budget Responsibility, the official forecaster, has reviewed what's known as the supply side of the economy. That is essentially how much each of us produces with whatever capital we're endowed with. And they have done a review which says that productivity will be growing much slower than they thought, which means the economy grows more slowly than they thought, which means that tax revenues don't come in the way that she hoped. So all of that means big hole in the budget. And because it's about getting debt down and not cutting public spending, which she said, it means taxes are significantly going up. And I suppose the aspect of this which I'm sort of puzzled is not quite the right word for, but which I know many business people, we were talking to a bunch of business people last night, right? And one of the things they were saying to us was this uncertainty about what's happening to taxes means they're putting investment decisions on hold. They can see consumers are not spending in the way that they would like. And so I suppose the bit of what happened today that they would certainly say if they were here they wouldn't like is it was all about costs going up again, but where was the vision for growth? And, more tax, not from just taxes going up, but just from the economy functioning in a more active way. When you talk to your colleagues, lots of them are totally obsessed, rightly, many would say, with getting the growth rate up. Were you, I know you don't want to give a running commentary, but just were you a bit surprised at all that there wasn't more of a growth message here?
Well, one of the other messages I really took out of it was the issue around productivity as well, which I think we've all really seen, haven't we? That's the economy that most people are living in, which is stagnant living standards, wages not keeping pace with price rises, jobs, people, working now doesn't actually give you a decent standard of living for many people in the everyday
economy. So why couldn't
economy.
she tell us how she's going to fix that?
Yeah.
That was the bit that was missing, it felt to
Well,
me.
I think maybe she wasn't saying that today, but I think that is the issue that we are seeking to address as a Labour government very strongly, which does take investment. It does take in things like opportunity and skills and making sure that we've got those good jobs of the future, which has been a big part of what we're talking about. So, yeah, I think, look, we've got to give a much stronger version maybe of what our diagnosis is of what's really wrong with the economy and how we're going about fixing it. And cost of living and inflation and so on is part of that story, but actually, just as big a part of that story for me, and I think for what we've been doing, it's just maybe, not been come through strongly enough, is around this issue of what the economists call productivity, what I would call an economy that just isn't working for ordinary people around the country. It's an economy that basically works for the few, not the many, and we've got to fundamentally rewire that. And that's a whole range of things. It's not just about growth. It's about growth for who and where, and that's a big part of our story.
You will remember, and Robert and I certainly do, Nick Clegg breaking his manifesto pledge on putting up tuition fees when he went into the coalition government. And I remember hearing back, from sources at the time that Nick Clegg had agreed to do this. I couldn't believe it. I thought, you've agreed to that? You're going to get slaughtered. And he indeed was, and arguably his reputation never really recovered from it. And he thought to himself, I think, he said privately at the time, I felt like I had no choice. It was the grown-up thing to do. We had to make grown-up choices. It was awful, but we had to do it. I'm not asking you to engage in a running commentary, but do you think, what Rachel Reeves seemed to be doing today, as I'm sure we'd all agree, is kind of, preparing the ground for potentially breaking a manifesto promise or coming forward with things that, she knows is going to be very difficult. Do you think that's landable, that you can break a manifesto promise and you can convince people that you had no choice and it's in the best interest of the country? Or do you just think, honestly, you just sustain such political damage that it's hard to go on?
Well, it's very difficult, isn't it? And trust in politics is at a very low ebb. That's part of the challenge that we face right now. It's not just that we've got an economy and a country that people don't feel work in their interest, which is why they keep voting for change, whether that's voting for Brexit, whether it was voting for Boris, whether it was voting for Labour in 2024. People do want to see those big changes in the way the country is run, and they're looking for answers to that question. But trust in politics as a force for good that can actually change their lives in that way, and trust in politicians and trust in politics is a really important factor in that as well. So I think we do have to tread very carefully on dealing with all of those issues: fairness, rewiring the country, rewiring the economy so that it does. These are big, difficult things to do, at the same time as taking people with us and making sure that people trust us to do it and that they support what we're doing, because at the end of the day, we are politicians and you do have to take the public with you in these decisions.
One of the things that is sort of striking, which I was looking back on today, is it's not only that, as you say, we lived through this time of appallingly declining trust in politicians, and actually a whole range of different people in authority. But the collapse of trust in politicians is something we should all be concerned about. And when you break a manifesto promise, that obviously reinforces the view that none of you are to be trusted. But interestingly to me, and I'm just these things are not necessarily forever, and they're not necessarily sort of iron rules. But you will remember, I can't remember whether you were doing the political job at the time, but you will remember that Gordon Brown's increase in national insurance to pay for the health service. Do you remember that? Mm-hmm. That was regarded as a clever and intelligent tax rise, and at the time looked quite popular. The public seemed to be in favour of paying a bit more tax to pay for.
Boris Johnson did the same, didn't he? Recently.
He tried. That wasn't quite so popular. But what was interesting about this particular increase was it was popular at the time, and then a year or two later, when Labour polled voters, voters were absolutely clear that they didn't want any more tax rises, and they didn't really like that tax rise. So it is, you can't take for granted that even a really well-sold tax rise is going to land well, particularly at a time where people, as you pointed out, millions of people are struggling to pay their bills. Now, I'm sure that she will pitch it in a way that those on absolutely lowest incomes aren't hurt, but even so, it's quite a big deal.
Well, you're anticipating what she is or isn't going to do, and I honestly don't know. So I think they're sort of hypotheticals, but obviously kind of raising revenue. I think what people will want to know is that fair? Is it those with the broadest shoulders? Am I being protected as an ordinary, modest income individual? Am I kind of being protected from that to a greater or lesser extent? And is it those with the broader shoulders who are going to pay the bigger share? So I think people want to trust in politics comes from lots of different ways, doesn't it? I think people want a clearer sense of us, and this is partly what I really campaigned on in my deputy leadership race. Is that I think people want a really much clearer sense of whose side we're on and what the purpose of the Labour government is, and this budget is a big moment for us to kind of reset that. So without knowing, and none of us know what is or isn't coming in that budget, that needs to be part of the frame of it.
But I do need to say one thing to you, which is that although I'm sure there will be choices in this budget which play into your view of the fairness agenda, the other thing she did say, and she said this absolutely explicitly, she did say, and this is why, I've actually now been saying for 2 weeks that the basic rate of income tax is going up. She said explicitly, every single one of us is going to have to make a contribution because the problem is too big for just, for example, the wealthy. The truth is, she could load a load of taxes onto the wealthy and it would not cover this hole. That is the problem.
Well, we'll have to see, won't we, what comes.
Well, we will come. Can I then now take you back to your sort of both, I suppose, campaign and then success in becoming deputy leader, and this sort of is connected to another aspect of what she said today. You were leader of the House of Commons. Mm-hmm. You attended cabinet, and you, during that very fraught period where Rachel Reeves was trying to push through these welfare reforms, these reductions in payments to people who are disabled, you were communicating to Downing Street how many MPs were pretty unhappy with the shape of those reforms. And two things happened. One was because they could see they couldn't get them through, they had to pull them. And some would say this is slightly eccentric. You were blamed as the messenger and you lost your job. But the silver lining of all of this was that MPs and indeed members thought good on you for speaking truth to power, and you got elected as deputy leader. Now, today, I don't know if you heard Rachel Reeves say this.
Yeah, I did.
But she said this thing. She said there's nothing progressive about welfare payments, when you've got, 1 million young people not in education, employment or training. Which, it's true, nobody wants 1 million young people not in education. But she was slightly sort of lecturing MPs that they'd got it wrong in stopping her pushing through her. I just wondered if you thought, those MPs were going to respond to that message. I wouldn't have thought they'd be very sympathetic to being told they were wrong, which is what happened today.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure that's quite how I took it. But look, as I've said in private and in public, I think the vast majority of the Parliamentary Labour Party are up for a conversation about how we need to change our welfare system so that it does support people to get into work, to make the most of their life and their opportunities in a way that it doesn't now necessarily, not all aspects of it. It does consign to people, it does incentivise people to consign themselves to long-term sickness rather than what can they do rather than what can't they do. But those kind of reforms, you've got to do carefully, you've got to do over the long term, you've got to have really thought through the intended and the unintended consequences of policy actions and decisions, and you need to sort of do that with all of those affected in a way that we can answer the question, because we were unable to answer those questions to our constituents previously, which is, will I now not get personal independence payment, which I need? Will I now not get it? So if you try and rush it and it's got holes in it and you've not thought it through, then you're not going to get it past Parliament. I mean, that's why I'm a great believer in our parliamentary democracy. You want to get things through, you want to change the law, you want to bring in bills, you've got to be really clear about your objectives and have really worked through policy. So I think that people would be up for a bigger conversation about it, but we do have to take people with us and not try and kind of rush things through with consequences we've not thought through.
So you're the new deputy leader. Mm-hmm. Congratulations, as we said at the start. I think we should tell the audience, how do you view the role? How would you define the role and the job because the truth of it is it's been a very different role and a very different job in different iterations with different people working to different leaders.
Definitely. And I've sort of been writing my own job description as I've been going along.
It's good
which is quite nice because it's particularly different right now because, it's always been a party job, not a government job. You're elected by the MPs and the party members. But particularly now because, of course, before this contest kicked off, the Prime Minister, Keir, had already appointed a Deputy Prime Minister. Obviously a man would get that job in the running, and then women will kind of run for the other job. But no, David Lammy's the Deputy Prime Minister and I'm the Deputy Leader of the party. And so in other times when we've been in government, even in the recent past with Angela, she occupied both of those positions at the same time. So I see this job very much as a political job, bringing the politics into the conversation, providing that kind of political sounding board for colleagues, for Keir as the leader, for Rachel as the Chancellor and others, so that we can reconnect through our party and our wider movement with the communities that we're here to serve and make sure we've got that kind of feedback loop much more strongly in the mix.
Can I just ask you one other question? Because you mentioned Angela, and Robert and I don't entirely agree on the Angela resignation. I watched what everyone thinks of what Rachel Reeves said today and her budget to come. I thought the scandal, in inverted commas, about Rachel Reeves last week was the biggest load of tripe. I mean, I just sat at her, it was sort of... Robert and I talked about it in the middle of the week. Was it the middle of the week? Anyway, at the end of the week, it sort of came out. And I thought, this is a scandal. I'm the Pope. I mean, sort of like a kind of oversight, and she didn't... I just thought it was absurd. And I listened to quite a lot of the media coverage, thankfully, hopefully not on our channel, but like across which was kind of hyperventilating. Oh, is Rachel Reeves going to lose her job? I was just like, this is just ridiculous. And I personally felt Angela Rayner was a bit hard done by. I wasn't like completely sure it was a resigning issue. And I every day I kind of, watch what's going on in America, where you just it's gobsmacking what's happening. And it just makes...
You've got a president who's basically set up a fund so that people can bribe him. I mean, it's phenomenal.
We probably shouldn't put it quite like that for the purposes... I'm sure he would absolutely deny it.
Sue because it's good advertising. More people will buy his bloody cryptocurrency. What can I tell you?
I guess my question is, do you share any of... And there are real political scandals, and I don't want us to stop covering them because that's our blooming job. But I think one of the things Robert and I have talked about quite a bit on this podcast is, we've got to get that right, because we've got to tell the public when it matters and when it doesn't. I mean, they're capable of making up their own minds, but how we frame it, what we choose to spend our coverage from. Did you watch? What did you think of Angela's resignation and the sort of Rachel Reeves non-scandal? And did you think, this is ludicrous?
Yeah, and I've been subject to some of those myself as well, and they really aren't stories, they really aren't scandals. And I mean, look, I think it was an oversight in Rachel's part, absolutely, an unfortunate oversight. I think in Angela's part, she was trying to act in good faith. I don't think she was trying to evade or kind of get around those things. And there are very high standards that people hold themselves to and the public hold us to. But we do need, I agree with you, there does need to be a bit of a recalibration of some of that, really, so that it's not just a plague on all your houses. There was some polling I saw recently about how much people thought the public purse spent on MPs' expenses, for example. And I think it was something like half the NHS budget that is what people thought, when in fact it's like, quarter of a percent or something. In the grand scheme of things, is an absolute tiny percentage of what we actually spend money on, because they hear so much about it. And so that does get hard, because then you do get plague on all your houses. People just think we're all in it for our own personal financial gain. That's what I think. We're not held in great kind of repute, are we? But it also puts people off. I mean, if this deputy leadership contest, if there'd been longer between it kicking off and you had to sort of put your name forward, I probably would have talked myself out of it, because I knew what would come with it, and some of that has come with it. I've had questions from the media, I've had some stories in the media. have you done this? Did your mortgage company know that? You know, are you kind of gaming this or gaming the other? Because that's what comes with it. You know, your entire personal life is kind of there for the taking, isn't it? And it will put more and more people off.
I mean, the hypocrisy, I think, in you know, of the way as a society we now sort of view MPs is you know, on the one hand, you know, we want you all to be absolutely brilliant, but on the other hand, you know, we hold you to not so much a sort of standard of probity, but just, you know, everybody in their personal life periodically makes a mistake. And yet, apparently, if you're an MP, you're not allowed to make any mistakes about anything, ever.
Quite soon we're going to be demanding that people stand down for a parking fine. And how dare she park her car in the wrong place? What was she doing?
But one of the points I made about the extraordinary furore over Rachel Reeves is actually a number of MPs have been done for speeding very, very fast indeed, and nobody suggested they should stand down. But truthfully, in terms of, you know, public harm, you know, going well over the speed limit, many would say is way more reckless and damaging than, you know, I mean, in this case, it turned out that it was just that her husband had forgotten that he had the right conversation and didn't manage to tell her by whatever deadline Downing Street had set her for coming up with an explanation. No, that was all. That was, you know, that was definitely like an episode of The Thick of It. But unfortunately for them, it was probably incredibly painful and not a comedy. Not a comedy at all. Just in terms of your job, it's really important. I mean, the most important bit must be to gauge the mood of, you know, members, supporters, try and reconnect the government with your base. Is there a system in place where are you going to go and see the Prime Minister once a week? How are you, because it only really works, this job, if frankly the Prime Minister's listening to you. So is there now an arrangement where you will go and see him on a regular basis?
Yes, and he's keen to do that. I'm keen to do that. You know, he respects this role completely. He understands that this role brings him an additional kind of view and an experience. And
so is there going to be a set time in the diary once a week to do this, do you think?
We probably won't be as often as that, but we're going to have regular get-togethers. Obviously, I was with him last night at the PLP. I sat next to him. He said lots of nice things about me, and, you know, we were put on that united front. So I think there was a sort of suggestion that somehow me getting this would be, you know, the kind of end of the Labour Party and some big division. And that's not the case at all. And absolutely, as you say, I think if what I'm hearing, what I'm experiencing, what I kind of know about, if that's taken on board, I think this can be really helpful.
Because some would say one of the problems for this government has been that sort of amazingly quickly it lost touch with what its supporters wanted.
Well, that's it, and it's pretty obvious, isn't it, when you think about it? You win an election, everyone goes off in their ministries, everyone goes off and sort of gets involved in government, and we sort of forget that we are a political party as well, and we've got to bring the politics into that conversation. You can't just rely on individual politicians to contribute the politics to the conversation. So, you know, I want to kind of institutionalise that a bit more and to bring that in. So that's not just about what we're hearing from our members and our supporters and our communities, but it's also this point about which, Keir talked about in his conference speech, I've been talking about, how we reunite the voter coalition that we need to defeat the forces of division and darkness and to be successful, but how the voter coalition we need to rebuild, to reunite the country. And that's work that has to be done politically. It can't be done in government, and that's what I'm bringing, that extra kind of capacity and attention to the conversation. And I'll be in the political cabinet meetings, which is sort of where we take some of those bigger decisions, those more political decisions.
Shouldn't you be Deputy Prime Minister, all joking aside?
Well, I'm not. So but that's in the
you're
gift of the
deputy leader.
Yeah, but that's in the gift of the Prime Minister, and David Lammy's doing that job. But I personally think there's a real virtue actually right now, as Robert says. I mean, part of the challenge for us, I think, as a government has been losing contact with some of the politics and some of the what we're hearing on the ground and who we're here to serve. And I think having someone who's not got the constraints of running a department and all the sort of constraints that come with being in government, I can do that, because really fully politically. And I think that's a freedom that brings a much more to the table than is hitherto the case.
Because I have heard conflicting things from different, members of the government. I mean, one or two have said Keir's mad; he should bring you into the cabinet. But there is this other argument, and I'm just interested to know which you think is more powerful. I mean, they say, it's just, if you're going to have your kind of impact, and if basically Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, can avoid, looking as though there's any kind of fission, you should be in the cabinet. But the alternative argument, which I personally think is probably stronger, actually, but I don't know what you think, is actually for a government that is so out of touch, it is probably better for you not to be in the cabinet because members might trust you a bit more, and that's also quite good for the Prime Minister. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. And you can reach across all the departments, across the things. You constantly just seeing things through that political prism and not the sort of government one. Because even Angela, who was a brilliant minister, brilliant deputy prime minister, brilliant deputy leader, and a real loss to us. I know that for her, there were times where she was engaged in some of her own negotiations across government, which perhaps kind of compromised her ability to sort of speak out on some other things that were happening elsewhere in government because she had her own sort of fish to fry. So I think there's just a freedom and a value I can bring that is just much more political and free from some of those constraints, which I think is what we need right now. With all of our movement.
You could argue that one of the things this government needs, and is certainly going to need in the run-up to the election, is a big galvanising issue that can bolt together the progressive vote, the centrist vote, and sort of be in contrast to kind of the kind of potential reform Tory vote. And we have to be careful talking about this because people are like, oh, why can't you just stop banging on about Brexit? But one argument would be, look, our economy is smaller than it would be otherwise. That's what we keep being told as a result of Brexit. People are not happy about Brexit. The polling has only been going one way over the last years. And therefore, one thing the Labour government could do is say, right, we're going to do a much closer, much better deal. We're going to join the single market or the customs union, or perhaps we're going to negotiate to go back in. And if you vote for us, the next, I'm making it up, as you can see, about what the policy could be. But you always used to be a pro-European, and I'm assuming you still are. Is that one of those things that you can see the logic of? And I think sometimes I'm surprised how little discussion there is about that in the party. It's still the great untouchable subject. Do you feel it's an untouchable subject? What's your thinking about that?
And just on that, this is something we've talked about a lot, Tom and I. Your big problem at the moment, and you talked about this in your acceptance speech when you became deputy leader, the problem at the moment is that the left is split, right? Greens are on the rise. Actually, there was a poll recently which showed the Greens were polling as high as Labour, which was something, really remarkable. Lib Dems doing very well. The problem that the left has got at the moment, or the problem that the Labour Party has got at the moment, is, in a marginal constituency, quite a lot of people are just saying, I'm so angry with Labour, I can't even bring myself to vote Labour, even to keep reform out. And so the challenge for Starmer or whoever's leading the party into the next election has got to be to give those people a reason to vote Labour rather than say Green or Lib Dem. And I think Tom's point, and I agree with him, we've talked about this a lot, is that were you to adopt a much more pro-EU stance, rejoining the single market, even possibly rejoin the EU, that would galvanise the whole of the left, wouldn't it?
Well, yeah, you're asking me kind of big things here now. Oh, look, this.
You've got a big job, so you've got to answer big questions.
This is, I mean, how we reunite that voter coalition is a key priority for me in this job.
Yeah.
Now, it's actually not a fair reflection to just say that is just a kind of pro-Remain, urban, kind of more liberal, left-leaning voter. We are losing votes to all sides. That's what I said in my acceptance speech. And we're not going to reunite that by trying to reform. We need a much bigger pitch for that. I did some big work on this. You probably remember, Robert, after the last election in 2019, produced a big report with Labour together then about how we reunite that voter coalition. And that report, to be honest, I reread it again recently, is as true today as it was then, and I'm going to refresh some of that work. But it's a bit like my own constituency, really, in Manchester Central. I've got the city centre, which is lots of young people or people that are more inclined to the Greens and the left. I've got a very diverse part of my constituency where the Gaza independents did well at the last election. And then the other half of my constituency is classic sort of northern red wall. And we are losing Labour votes there as well.
Yeah.
And I think going down a route of saying what we need to do is kind of rejoin the EU, might speak to part of that voter coalition, but it doesn't speak to all of it. And what unites that voter coalition is the quest and the real thirst for change in how our economy is run. Because if you're a young person living in Manchester city centre, spending an absolute fortune on rent and very little prospect of ever getting on the housing ladder, or you're a large family kind of struggling to get by, or you're an older white pensioner couple, in Failsworth in my constituency, what you felt over the last 10, 15, maybe even 20 years is that life has got harder and harder and harder, with less and less kind of disposable income, if you like, with not the kind of future that you once hoped for, and a sense that actually those at the top of our economy, the energy companies recently, or the banks, or those with assets, those with wealth, they've been unaffected by all of the economic kind of waves that we've gone through, and they really want a kind of quite a deep and powerful rewiring about making the country work in the interests of the many and not the few. And I think that's what unites people, actually, not reopening the Brexit debate. Because yes, I was a pro-European, I am a pro-European, and I did campaign for yes, but then I was one of those people, a very small number of people in the Labour Party, who after the referendum felt very strongly we should respect the result, and trying to reopen that or say actually people got it wrong and we should have another referendum and whatever, I didn't think was the right thing, because I knew that many people who'd voted Labour, many of our heartland communities would be like, well, hang on a minute, we've given you the answer, just get on with it. And so it gets back to the conversation we were having earlier about trust in politics as well. We have to respect when people, it's not the voters who get things wrong, it's us that get things wrong.
I mean, I suppose, and we shouldn't really labour this point now, and we can come back to it on another episode, but I suppose the counter-argument to what you've just said is you've now only got 3.5 years before the last time you can go back to the country, right? And
that's ages in the current political climate.
It's ages in terms of how fast allegiances swing, but it is no time at all when it comes to getting the economy growing, right? Because the kind of reforms that you need to do to get the economy growing, if you don't do them literally on day one, and truthfully, I'm afraid you haven't, you've got no chance of really getting a step change in that growth. As I say, 3.5 years from now. The one thing that could certainly persuade investors that the growth rate was going to rise would be joining the single market. It just is a fact that is what investors would regard as a reason to buy government debt. Interest rates would come down. You'd get into a virtuous cycle. So I agree with you that there is an enormous risk here, which is lots of, including your own supporters, would say, we've made this decision, don't reopen it. But you haven't got a lot of options. My concern for this government is if you can't get living standards up, frankly, the game's up. And that, that is the priority. And you haven't got that many options now to get those living standards up. That's if I were you, that's what would worry me.
Yeah, I mean, it's living standards, absolutely, but it's it's also a sense of the country working in people's interests too. So, and I don't think we've made enough of some of those things that we've already done, and we've got more to come that is doing that. For example, the Renters' Rights Bill, taking on the vested interests of the landlords, setting up Great British Energy, taking on the vested interests of the large energy companies, the Employment Rights Bill, which many don't like, but giving people dignity and security in work, because work now is not what it used to be. Work doesn't give, most people in poverty these days are in work.
So these are all big things. So why if voters are listening, and I think most of them aren't listening, but when they're listening, why aren't they giving you credit for that?
Well, I don't think what we've been able to do strongly enough is join that together in a more compelling sort of story, being clear about our diagnosis of what is wrong and how we're going about fixing it. And we have ceded the agenda too much, I think, to Nigel Farage and others, and I said that in my acceptance speech. And we've got to, I think we do need to sort of set the agenda more strongly about what we think is really wrong with this country and all these things that we are doing to fix it in one, so that people understand that they all join together, because I don't think we've been able to do that.
We must let you out of our studio.
Actually, we've got to ask one more question.
I'm going to ask one more question, and I'm going to leave the final question to you, Robert.
Okay.
My final question is this. You talked a little bit earlier about, you're deputy leader now, and you've had everyone already, journalists, you're crawling all over every aspect of your life and all the rest of it. But it's a big job. The leadership wanted someone else, but you got it. Mm-hmm. When the result comes in and you've won, what's going through your head?
Well, I was kind of relieved, to be honest. These are bruising things to go through. And although I stood against the odds and I was the outsider and I was the one not expected to get it, sort of by the end, I was then dubbed as the sort of front runner, and I knew the reality was much closer than the polls had it. So that 24 hours before the result was announced, I never get anxious about things. I'm not a nervous person, but I was completely knotted inside. So when they actually told us, we got told 20 minutes earlier in a private room, to be honest, that knot just sort of went out of me, and I thought, well, I've got a good speech. I'm just going to enjoy the moment. This is a historic moment, and I'm going to just do my bit. That was all I really thought about. I haven't still probably processed fully, like, oh my God, I'm deputy leader of the Labour Party. That's kind of a massive thing. I'm still kind of doing my knitting about it. So I probably will process that at some point.
And you presumably put to the Prime Minister this need to tell a more compelling story about how everything fits together. Does he get it?
He completely agrees, and I think if you look.
So why isn't he doing it?
Well, I think if you look at his conference speech, if you look at
his
what
conference
he said,
speech was good.
His conference speech was really good, and I think it really gave a sense of that. And I think what I can really help him with, and I think what he wants me to help him with, is for that to be a much clearer kind of narrative throughout his government and through the rest of what we're actually doing. And I think I can actually help with that.
Okay, well, we'll have you back on after local elections. You can tell us whether you've succeeded.
Yeah.
Well, listen, I think we both really enjoyed this, Chancellor. Thank you very much indeed for sparing the time and coming on.
Yeah, it was terrific.
Pleasure.
It was really interesting. Thank you very much. And so that's it from this edition of Talking Politics. Goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.